This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Health Advocacy Network. MHAN advocates for a consumer, family-driven mental health system of care that provides an array of service choices that are timely, responsive, and effective. Our vision is for every North Dakotan to have access to the right service, whether it be preventative, treatment, or recovery, at the right time, when the service is needed, and at the right place, as near his or her home as possible. To learn more about MHAN, our advocacy efforts, and literature about the North Dakota mental health system, visit our website at www.mhan.org. Again, our website is www.mhan.org.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the MHAN podcast. Today we tackle, I think, one of the more complicated and then one of the most, I think, engaging topics of conversation when we talk about mental health services, and that is, it's youth services. And we've got two organizations represented and two wonderful human beings that are going to join us as guests today. Mark Heiner from Youthworks and Erica Markle from Fraser, LTD. Join us, Mark and Erica. Welcome to the MHAN podcast.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. With me, as always, my delightful co-host, Matthew Cleary. How are you, my friend?
Doing pretty good. Excited for the fall weather to kick in.
Well, you are at least one person who I know that is interested in said weather change. That is delightful. I feel like we should probably start at the start here, where we're going to kind of go around the horn. We will start with Mark. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about who you are, job title, role, and kind of what your agency Youthworks does.
Sure. That sounds really good. Yeah. My name is Mark Heiner. I'm actually the Assistant Executive Director for Youthworks, and Youthworks serves North Dakota. We've got locations actively providing services in Bismarck and Fargo and Minot, and a small outreach services in Dickinson as well. Our primary goal is to help ensure that all youth have a safe place, that they can belong, that they can be heard. And so what typically wraps around that is trying to figure out, why are youth not having a safe place to belong, and why are they not being heard? And so we offer shelter, counseling, transitional housing, and other support services for youth that are runaway, that are homeless, that have been trafficked, that might be in situations that are at high risk for those type of events. My educational qualifications, I've got a bachelor in social work, and I've been at the organization here at Youthworks. Let's see if I can do the math. 26 years now. I've been working at this organization.
It's fantastic. Erica, same question to you. I think kind of part of the intro piece, and like who you are, job title, about your role, and a little bit about Fraser LTD.
Yeah, so I'm Erica. I'm our Youth Service Program Administrator. So my role is I oversee all of our youth programs. And what that looks like is we have a drop-in center. It's called Stepping Stones Resource Center. We have two housing options. Our first is transitional living. That program is a 30 to 90-day program where we are getting people up off the street or out of situations where maybe safety is a risk where they're staying. It's unsafe. They're not comfortable. Maybe they're getting discriminated against. So we get them out of those situations into it's a home. It's a 5-person bedroom, or I should say it's a 5-bedroom house in the community. Get them in there, help them find appropriate living situations within that 30 to 90-day period. Then we have our permanent supportive housing. We have family units available, and we have single units available there. And we help individuals that are chronically homeless. That means they've been experiencing homelessness for a year or more, 4 times in the past 3 years, and they have a disability. So that might be like a mental health disorder, substance use disorder. We get them into safe housing and provide wraparound services for them. And then I guess a little bit about Fraser. we're a pretty inclusive, encompassing organization. We are actually the longest standing nonprofit in North Dakota. We serve individuals throughout their entire lifespan. Honestly, we have programs for children. So we have a child care center, and that in that child care center, we have a special needs coordinator. We work with individuals with special needs, getting them integrated into mainstream society. We help with that same model of integrating individuals into mainstream society with our day support programs for adults. We have independent living, that's residential settings for individuals with special needs. And we have my program, which is the transitional living services, supporting the youth in the community. And then we also have mental health, and that's through Valley Hope. We have therapists.
Okay, so I have two related questions, and some of you, or both of you, have actually kind of alluded to some of these questions here. But could you kind of describe the populations that you are serving, and then kind of also some of the common issues that those populations experience, including with their interactions with the human service delivery system?
Do you want me to take that one first? I've spoken, so I think I've stolen the attention, and I'm going to run with this one. At Youthworks, we actually tend to kind of separate two different age populations. So we serve youth, but many people aren't aware that in a lot of people's eyes, including brain scientists, that brain's not fully developed until age 26. And so we have some services for youth that are young adults. So that would be 18 to 24 years of age, where we provide services to youth that are homeless or victims of human trafficking. So just to differentiate that right off the top, the second layer would be youth that would be otherwise known as juveniles or minors or under 18. And so that would typically be in that 12 to 17-year-old category. And so the types of services do vary for obvious reasons. And that is that those young adults are legally recognized as adults and can make their own decisions without parental consent. Our services for youth that are under 18 would require that parental consent, or in some occasions, there are situations where they're not safe, and we might be a part of helping to alert that child protective system. And indeed, on some occasions, they actually would go into foster care or be removed from the custody of their parents. And so, having just said that broadly and basically, each of those populations, being in that runaway or homeless or being victims of trafficking or being at risk of that, are really struggling with stability, struggling with mental health, struggling with family acceptance. And some of the things that might help kind of put this into perspective is just statistics. Sometimes numbers help us, and sometimes they bore people. So we'll try to make this not too boring, but insightful and helpful. Sadly, over half of the youth that we work with are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And so there's one grossly overrepresented portion of the population that has had some of these struggles, and that we are offering to try to provide those services to. Another portion of the population that's sadly overrepresented is over a quarter, or roughly 25%, of the youth that we work with are members of the LGBTQIA+ community. And so there's another group that is struggling with housing, is struggling with victimology, has been bullied, has been mistreated, and oftentimes disowned by their own families. And so that's another group that we work with. And this will come as no surprise, but if you're struggling with the lack of stable housing, if you've got some potential family challenges and issues, and if you might not feel like society is valuing you, then you're also far more likely to have mental health challenges. And so behavioral health issues encompasses roughly 2/3 of the youth that we work with. And That's been relatively consistent actually for quite some time, and we don't necessarily expect that to change because we realize and acknowledge that behavioral health issues are going to come along with the issues that we're presenting on or that we're working to address. An underlying factor within all of that is trauma. It's really, really challenging to be 14, 15, even 19, 20, and have had as many life changes and being given up on and struggle to meet people's basic needs, to not experience some level of trauma. Clearly, there can be the more exaggerated versions of gross physical, sexual abuse, being trafficked. And there also can be some other examples that might be more mundane and basic, such as I'm lacking basic needs and I'm struggling to survive on a daily basis. So those are those are the youth that we work with. Those are the youth that we get to spend our time with and get to know their stories and help them to reach the goals that they've got set for themselves. And so it's a real pleasure to provide this service and have that opportunity, to not just make a change in the individual young people's lives that we get a chance to build relationships with, but to start looking at some of these issues on a more systemic level and what kind of things are happening within our state and within our communities. So that if I can make a systemic change, I might impact 100 youth instead of necessarily just working with one youth at a time. So those are some of the other things that we'll try to do is support and look at things broader.
All right. And here at Fraser, we are very similar with everything that Mark is having happen at Youthworks. We serve youth ages 16 to 26. So we don't go as low in that age range as Mark and your team at Youthworks do. So we serve 16 to 26-year-olds, and then we also serve, their dependents. And so we have a lot of young adults that come here that have children, and we support that family unit as well. A lot of the issues that you identified are the same issues that we're really having here. We have over 80% of our clients that we serve are experiencing housing instability. And so it's really just trying to focus on meeting the basic needs of these individuals, right? So they don't have housing. A lot of them don't have access to food. They don't have access to hygiene products, to clothing. They don't have a reliable way to get to and from school. And so you see a huge dropout rate with our youth. It's not from the lack of wanting public education. It's from the lack of being able to get there, to focus when they're in school, to do all those things. And so really what we try to do is provide those wraparound services for the youth that we serve to try to meet that need. Like you were saying, Mark, so many of our youth are coming from traditionally stigmatized populations. So we have a lot of youth that we're serving from groups in the community where there is a huge overrepresentation within the homeless community. So LGBTQIA+, our Native American population, our Hispanic population, African American and refugee populations as well. We see a lot of here. And so it's just really trying to help get our clients kind of over that barrier that we kind of put on them systemically in society, right? So trying to help them get engaged in the services and get the wraparound supports, because we know that most of our youth, I would say actually over half of our youth, have some type of disorder, whether that be a mental health disorder, a substance use disorder, their ACEs score, so the adverse childhood experiences. Those are through the roof when we do just like different testing with them. And so what we're really trying to do is just figure out a way to have a safe place for our youth to go, to get their needs met, to feel like they were a part of a group, to feel like they're part of what we call our Fraser family. So they feel like they are safe, they have a space in the community, that they're being heard. And so a lot of our youth, when they first come to us, aren't engaged with other services. And so that's kind of something that we really hone in on too, is being that springboard of services in the community, right? So a lot of what we do at Stepping Stones is being that initial contact point, learning what they're needing, and then helping them find that group, that niche in the community.
Mm-hmm. It seems like both of you have had this sort of shift in the kind of populations you're serving, because I think a lot of individuals are maybe even sort of coming out of the proverbial woodwork and saying, okay, well, this is now a serious, or the outreach, it seems to be a little more aggressive to sort of bring people out of the shadows and into some of the services that you have. Has there been a significant change in the sort of problems they're facing? Mark, is this just something in a long string of traditional problems that you've had again, you've been there for 26 years. You've probably seen, where you started off like, okay, well, these are two of the things that we're probably realizing. Has there been a dramatic shift in issues, and what are they, and what are you doing to kind of address some of those?
That's a fantastic question. At its roots, it's mostly the same. However, I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, the layers of complications that our society has placed, including social media and information, the access to information, it changes the way people interact. It changes how they feel accepted, and it's so much more immediate. So what we see on both a positive and a negative side of it is, I may have much more. I might have more readily available if I use other sources, negative or positive influences on me. I could get therapy online, right, and take advantage of some of the technology. But I can go down some really dark holes and find myself in a dark web that did not occur previously. The smartphones, and this will probably date myself and maybe a lot of us, but they're only about 12 to 15 years old. Society hasn't had a smartphone forever, and yet our society is really very, very, very much grown accustomed to having that. And so young people at younger and younger ages have access to more and more things. And like I said, sadly, sometimes it can really send people down into a dark place if they're not getting some support outside of that. And it can really, I don't want to say brainwash, because I'm not sure if that's right, but just influence. It can really influence behavior, influence thoughts. And if you do not have a supportive family, supportive network of friends or others, it has a much more powerful control than I saw 20 years ago on young people.
Erica, you see the same things, or is there some different change that you've noticed that you're serving a little bit differently than when SSRC started?
So I would say we've seen a pretty significant increase in substance use disorders. And that's just statewide, I would honestly say, from talking with other providers, is it seems like there's been kind of a shift in the substances that are used. So fentanyl is a huge drug that I think we've seen in the past 5 years really take off. Percocets. People are using a lot more harsher drugs, right? Like methamphetamine than maybe in the past. And so you can look and you can say, yes, substance use disorders, that's always kind of been an issue, but what substance is being used. That's continued to get a little bit harsher. I would say we are seeing as a state a lot more overdoses. We're also seeing the need for, Fargo has the harm reduction center. That's always been in need, but they're providing right now, I would say, such a vital service with the Narcan and with things like that maybe in the past, without the amount of fentanyl that's getting laced, maybe there was less overdoses. I have heard from the youth in our community that just the amount of friends and family that they know that have really had a spike in the using substances in and of itself is risky, but the risks associated now versus 5 years ago with using, I would say, has really increased because there are people that don't know what they're getting. They think it's one thing, and then boom, all of a sudden they're having an overdose and they didn't know it had fentanyl in it. And we are seeing that with all of the shelters here in Fargo, and we're hearing that from all of our partnering agencies. And I would say that's really increased, but also like the mental health component. People are feeling lonely. I think part of it was COVID. I think another part of it is that people are feeling comfortable to talk about it. I think with COVID, one thing that kind of is a positive that stemmed from it is people took time to look at their mental health, and people were able to sit there and say, this really is an issue, with society being a little bit more accepting of that. And a lot of the youth that we serve have severe mental health. And I think that stems back, right? Like we've talked about, the youth that we're serving, huge amount of trauma. And we're looking at the ACE scores, and those are through the roof. And we're looking at all these things. And so you would typically see that. But I would say in the past, a lot of the youth weren't maybe as comfortable to talk about it as they are now.
Well, I think a follow-up to that too, maybe Mark, you can kind of maybe start this, is technology, a real increase in sort of, substance abuse disorder, mental health anguish, all of that. How does that drive the shift in training for your staff to deal with this? I mean, already you're overstressed, overworked, over sort of the deluge of things that you have to deal with. How on earth do you navigate the immediacy need to train constantly on all these ever-changing things that you're now being peppered with that you traditionally haven't had at the same time?
Our staff training plan just keeps on adding more and more things to make sure that we are aware of. And so, early interventions for suicide intervention, understanding trauma, being able to implement motivational interviewing, all our list of things that we are training our staff on, making sure we're following housing first, et cetera, is long. And this is good and bad. So the good part of it is that I would say many of those issues we are learning more as we go. And so it's not to say that all of those issues didn't exist prior as much as it is that we have gained more knowledge. And I'm going to use myself as the perfect example of what not to do and how we can learn from that. About, I want to say it's a good 15 or 20 years ago, before there was a lot of attention placed on human trafficking. We had some situations within our transitional housing program where myself and some of our staff saw a relationship with someone and thought this was a possessive boyfriend. In fact, it typically was discussed as a possessive boyfriend situation. And when we gained more knowledge and understanding of what human trafficking really looks like and what really is happening, we identified that's not a possessive boyfriend. That's someone who's trafficking an individual. And did we miss stuff in the past? Possibly. Can we look to the future and say, now we need to educate ourselves more about what those warning signs are and how we can intervene and how we can provide services? For certain. That's one that stands out really strongly to me. The other one that stands out really strongly to me is in the last 10 years, we've made a concerted effort to make sure that all of our staff were trained safe zone, so that we have a safe place for people that are LGBTQ plus to come. And if you don't provide that safe place, you may not have as much knowledge about who people are. If I don't feel like I can trust you, I might not share with you that I'm considering myself to be gender neutral, and I'd rather have a they pronoun. If that person who meets them for the very first time makes assumptions and uses the pronoun in front of the youth, that means we're less likely to identify, and we're less likely to see some of the potential challenges that they're experiencing. So statistically, we've seen an increase in youth who are LGBTQIA+, and it is probably an increase because society has shown an increase. But for sure, it's also us identifying because we're doing a better job because of our training towards our staff and making sure that we are providing that safe environment. So I think those are two good examples where they're components of what we're doing. It's an understanding to be able to provide, comprehensive services. But it is, you said it very well at the beginning, it's complicated. Because there is not a simple solution to address someone's homeless needs or someone's victimization. And it's layered in complexities. It's never as simple as, their parents gave up on them. It's never as simple as they're being bad and misbehaving, or even that they have a mental health issue and that's why they're in this situation. It is never black and white and cause and effect. It's always multi-layered, and many of these factors fit together. And so, yes, we do our best to make sure we have all sorts of different layers of trainings to meet many of the things that our young people are coming to us with.
And Eric, kind of follow-up question of that. How has it been getting that training for your staff to address some of these tweaks and both tweaks and massive changes in those populations that you're serving?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, it has been crazy how much the need for training has changed, even in the past 3 years. But I would say, as a whole, our community, so the Fargo-Moorhead community, has really stepped it up. Agencies are kind of partnering together, right? So if I know something about youth, I can go to the shelters and talk about that as kind of that, community expert, and maybe someone that, when we do extended hours and we need to know how do you run a shelter, teach us some of the things that we need to know. They can come in and they can kind of teach us. And we have, the city of Fargo, who runs the Harm Reduction Center. They can come in and they can kind of teach us, what does harm reduction look like? And we have community meetings where we talk about what is housing first. How can you teach that to your staff? And so our list has definitely grown, but I would say the community partnerships have also become tighter due to that. We have really been leaning on each other and figuring out together how we get through this and how we meet the needs of our clients. And kind of like what Mark was talking about with like the human trafficking. We are learning that maybe in the past some things were missed because we didn't ask the questions because we didn't know what the questions were. And we didn't know what that looked like. And so what we're really focusing on is kind of coming together to be that wheelhouse, not only for the clients, but for the providers too. where if I don't know something, I can go and ask Mark and his team at Youthworks. I have this situation, right? And we're not going to use client names and we're not going to do that, but we can say, what are the basis of human trafficking? What are the red flags that I need to look out for? I have this couple and I'm concerned about it. And we can really be there as teammates for each other. And that's definitely something that's happening in Fargo and Moorhead, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
So I had a couple of more systemic questions. So for people that don't know, a lot of times nonprofit organizations such as yourselves, you're part of the human service delivery system, but at the same time, you're also kind of degrees separated from a lot of what we would consider the more traditional, more established roles like local, state, and federal government programs and services. So how has the human service delivery system as a whole tried to address the needs of your populations? And the reason why I'm setting this up is so we could discuss kind of like how has the system worked or not worked?
I feel like I'm always stealing the thunder. So Erica, if you want to go first on this one.
Sure. I think that there's a lot of positives. I think that there's area to grow. I mean, we all know about the red tape. It's hard to get things to change systematically. It's really hard to get things to change. It takes time. And unfortunately, with the youth that we are serving, time is not in their favor, right? Because if you're homeless, if you're out on the street, the longer it takes for that system-wide change to happen, the longer you are not getting your resources met, your needs are not being met. So really, I would say what we've been doing in the nonprofit world is pairing together through, we have the North Dakota Coalition to End Homelessness. Up here in Fargo, we have the Fargo Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness. We are really getting together and we are sitting down as local organizations with one voice, with, one front saying, this is what we need. We're taking that, to the city, to the state, even nationally, and saying, this is what we are seeing as, the local experts in the community. And I would say that that's really been a positive change. Because they know that we're on a unified front. They know that, if Youthworks is seeing it the same way as Fraser is seeing it, the same way as, the YWCA is seeing it, obviously this is an issue. Obviously, it's not just one organization. And I think it helps not only for it to be seen more seriously, but as more of an urgent need that needs to be met. Yeah, I don't know, Mark, if you have anything else really to add to what we're doing.
Really, this is a good question. It's a really, really good, deep question. That's why I punted it to you. Really, I actually, but I'm just looking for you to help bail me out on that really tough question, Eric. No, in all seriousness, the systemic challenges that happen within a family and then lead to a system of child welfare trying to replace the family, right? So you've got, maybe just walk through this with me. So you've got a young person at the age of 8, 9, or 10 that has been abused or neglected by their parents. By the age of 11, 12, or 13, they are placed outside of their home. They're in foster care, group homes, might find their way into the correctional system, placed out at the youth correctional center, maybe another group home, and find themselves ready for a discharge from that care. There's another statistic that I've talked myself right into one right there, which is last year, 46% of the youth that were homeless, that were 18 to 24 that we worked with in North Dakota, previously were in either the juvenile justice or the foster care system. So it's impossible for us to not challenge the system. It's impossible. But it's fair for us to also acknowledge that a system can't be a family, right? So there's a real well, that is a gross overrepresentation on one hand, and on the other hand, you go, but they don't have the structure. One of the things we've learned, actually, I'm going to go back to our training question briefly. We left out a couple of important aspects of training, and that is some of our federal funders, whether that be the Housing and Urban Development HUD, or whether that be we have runaway and homeless youth funding from the federal government. They really have identified some good best practices. So going back to this young person who might have been in the system, who's now making it out and saying, okay, so what does that really tell us, and what can we really do about that? The Family Youth Services Bureau, which is a department of the Administration of Children and Family Services, which is a part of the federal umbrella of Health and Human Services. So if that makes sense, HHS, and then Administration of Children and Family Services, Family Youth Services Bureau funds this particular branch of runaway and homeless youth services. And they identify that youth need help when they're young adults to become successful and to not go back to homelessness by getting help with employment, getting help with education, addressing their emotional well-being or their well-being in general, so their physical or their emotional well-being. But another important one that people often don't think about is permanent connections to adults that care. So that's what that foster care system can't replicate. So what can be done so that young people can have that parent, uncle, guardian, somebody who's really going to say, I'm there for life. I just had a conversation not that long ago with someone who was in their 30s and another in their 40s and another in their 60s who are saying, do you ever stop parented? And do you ever stop being parented? Parenting, I'm still being parented and I'm still parenting. I have two young men who are in their 20s who I'd like to say I'm still parenting. It is the natural way of providing that service. So it's complicated because if I don't have that permanent connection, then I'm setting myself up. It's like I've taken away one of the legs of the bar stool, and I no longer can rely on that. I might be fine. I might be able to survive, but you've pulled one of those bar stools away, which means it's going to be a little bit harder for me to sit up straight and to have my basic needs be met.
So one additional question would be to kind of hone in a little bit on your comment that there are challenges to the system that community providers, including nonprofit organizations such as yourselves, are trying to make to governmental structures up and down our government. So in terms of things that you're looking to see happen, what would some of those things be?
I've got a couple right off the top of my head. And we've made some progress, but yet there needs to be continued progress on this. One of the things that's a struggle for us at our organization when we're working with the youth under 18 is whether or not parental permission is required to provide services. And so 2 years ago, a legislative bill was brought to North Dakota legislature and discussed whether or not we could have youth access services or access shelter or access healthcare or access vital records. Those were the ones that we visited about. And for the record, that was formed by a youth advisory board and young people who experienced homelessness who said, these were my struggles, right? These are the things systemically that is making it harder for me. We've had individuals who were technically under 18, but yet also a parent who had difficulty accessing healthcare for their child because they didn't have the right to necessarily access that health care because they were not over 18 themselves. So right there's challenges. So that was a mini success in that there was legislation passed that allowed young people to access health care if they're homeless, but we still don't have the ability to access fully services. It seems splintered. There are certain things that you might be able to receive, and there are other things that you cannot receive. And I have a really, really clear example why this might be a challenge. If I'm identifying as being gay, and I'm 16 years old, and my parents are ultra conservative and completely I know this ahead of time. My parents would not tolerate this. I don't feel safe sharing this fact with them. Where can I go to talk with someone about that without my parents knowing that I want to have these type of conversations with someone, right? So having that ability to have a higher level or a support service that doesn't require parents to sign off on or to know of or to participate in some of those services. And honestly, I use that as what to me, it feels like a really good example, but it's a very cloudy example because there's also, well, that might be true. And you might be able to access, you could join a club in school and be part of the GSA club and maybe there's another opportunity for you to go to something that might be more social. But yet the what we're hearing from youth again and again is, I don't know and I'm not sure and I don't know if I feel safe and is my parents going to know about this and how can I do that without my parents becoming aware of that. The flip side of that is also very obvious, which is if you have a young person who's suicidal, safety is of the utmost importance. And how would you not want to make sure that a parent is involved in that discussion about the safety of their young person? And so, yeah, these are fantastic questions, Mike and Patrick and Erica. It's just like, crystal ball, how do we solve the many layers, that are associated with that? Because we do kind of butt our heads up against things. And it might be a simple thing that becomes much more complicated, or it could be literally there aren't enough facilities or foster homes available for youth. And so youth are being returned to their home, to their parental home, even though the system is concerned about the safety. So there's those other parts, which is that system meeting those needs. I think many young people would say, gosh, no, I ended up having to go home and I didn't like it. And if you talk to someone who's administering the system, you're going to find out maybe that situation wasn't black and white. It might have been more gray, and that it wasn't quite as clear that there was imminent physical danger. And so they did go back to home, but yet the young person's perspective is, I got sent back to a really crappy situation.
I think the follow-up question to that too, and Erica, maybe you can kind of expound on this, is that there's gaps everywhere, right? We see them, we know that they're happening, we're expanding programs crazy. Everyone's talking about workforce, and it's got to be something that you both think about a great deal. How does the shortage affect the vulnerable populations you're serving? And then how? I mean, I think we can infer that's not great. But maybe, Erica, you want to start out that just, how is not finding enough people to do the things that are needed to do impacting those that are coming to Fraser, for example, for assistance?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the workforce issues are impacting everyone. And I was actually just at a conference and I was speaking with a lady from Texas, and they are having the same issues in their shelter as we are here. So we're not alone in North Dakota with it, which is comforting and concerning all at once. But in our programs, like we are 24/7 residential. That's been incredibly hard because we are serving some of the most vulnerable in our community, right? So in order to qualify for those programs, once again, you have to meet the definition by HUD of chronically homeless. That means you have been homeless for over a year on the street and have a disability. So how do we get those guys the support that they are needing, and that not only needing, but that they deserve? It's something where we've really had to kind of take out a little sheet of paper and prioritize what is a need versus what is a want for our programs, and really make sure that we are focusing first and foremost on the safety, the security of our programs and of our buildings. Now, that being said, we are slowly getting out of the slump. One thing we had to push back was starting our 24/7 emergency shelter at Stepping Stones. Excited to say we're starting that November 1st. It's a little later than we have done in previous years, but once again, the staff shortages just made it not feasible until November 1st to really start it. We needed to make sure that we had enough staff to make sure that the safety, the security of those that are going to be accessing the shelter is able to happen, as well as making sure that the staff are trained appropriately. Like we talked about, that long list, we had to make sure we met the check marks there before we can, open a shelter for those in the community that are at really the highest risk of needing wraparound services, and having that trauma-informed care is going to be hugely important as we establish them in our community with different services. We have a lot of people that kind of get shipped up here in winter from other locations. I'm sure, Mark, you're aware of that too. In Fargo, we have a lot of the shelters, and so it's making sure that we are getting ready for that influx of clients that we're going to start to see here. But yeah,
I would.
That's us. Sorry, Mark.
No, you're fine. I didn't mean to cut you off either. I agree with what you're saying. The only other thing I would kind of piggyback on is the growing effect that it has on all of the staff. So if we just start with the microcosm of a hourly shelter worker who's going to physically be there, when we have difficulty having enough shelter staff, then it becomes a burden on everyone else. And so you've got full-time staff who are working a full-time job, who are helping to cover a shelter shift overnight, for example, or who are helping to fill in a larger amount, which leads to more frustration, burnout, et cetera. So it becomes the workforce issue is a workforce issue on all levels of that workforce. It's difficult keeping people in all positions. But especially when it's on that frontline worker, then that's where it does affect everyone else.
So, Mark, this might be a pretty good transition to discuss kind of how programs can impact both those that are being served as well as staff. And this is one instance where I think our audience might want to hear more about it. So there's a two-part question here. The first one is, could you briefly summarize the purpose of the shelter bed program that Youthworks provides? And the second part of this question is, about a year ago, we had heard there were some issues that you folks were facing in operating this program. And could you describe what some of those issues were? And then I can follow up after that.
That sounds really good. Yeah, I really appreciate that question. So when Youthworks was founded, we were founded as a basic runaway center. In other words, it can be serving as a runaway shelter. In the state of North Dakota, we're the only organization in the state that is federally funded to be one of these runaway shelters. So if you're under 18 and you've run away from home, we've got some funds to support that. The funds are not nearly enough to financially support an actual shelter for all of the youth that would come in. And so over the course of the last 3 decades, Youthworks has built more complementary projects to help support the shelter. So it's not just a runaway shelter. It can be a shelter for youth. There's a program that was called Attendant Care previous that really is more from a law enforcement perspective. Well, maybe a youth got cited by law enforcement. It's not appropriate for them to go home. Can they hold over with us versus being detained? So it's a non-secure place. So there's funds that would come from there. And there's also times where that foster care system has had youth that they didn't have a longer term solution for. And so utilizing our shelter for that. So it's a short-term care and assessment center that has multiple streams of funding to try to help meet those needs. Our beds are typically not more than 5 per site, 5 to 8 total beds, Minot, Bismarck, Fargo, separate beds in each of those locations. And so financially, it's become really difficult to meet those needs when we have the collision of the workforce issues. We made the decision to increase people's wages, but there wasn't necessarily as much funds from all those funding sources to help cover that. And we also had a shift within the state's shelter system where there's a need to have a youth who's been adjudicated or who's been labeled, if you will, for lack of a better word, delinquent, to be sheltered at the same location as someone who's non-delinquent. And so that really has created some significant challenges because we're used to having 5 beds in a shelter that might have two or three youth in it at a time. And the funding was not necessarily associated with a single youth, but maybe it was funding that was broad. Like this runaway shelter, we have some broad funding to help cover the expenses associated with that. And we're, unfortunately right now, the challenge is we're having to look at this and say, we need to have 2 separate locations with potentially 2 separate staff that can meet those needs. And you still have the 2.5 youth, or actually, I'm not accurate there. The state has been working really hard to not make as many placements outside of the home. And so those numbers are even lower. So with 1.2 youth, and don't quote these numbers, by the way, this roughly on average, we've gotten from 2 or 3 youth to 1 to 2 youth is kind of what's happened. The financial feasibility is significantly more difficult then because you have to pay 2 separate staff and have 2 separate locations with insurance and support and all the other things that are associated with that. And so I am not going to lie, it has been incredibly difficult to figure out how we can continue to maintain these shelters and so that they can meet the varying needs that youth in our state have for us.
And Mark, to follow up on that, during the interim session, there had been quite a bit of discussion about this very issue and the urgent need to continue the work of the juvenile justice reform that has been going on while also addressing these gaps that have been created as a result of the way things went. So there had been some discussion that providers as well as the state were going to be meeting to kind of hammer out a solution or a series of solutions by August of 2022. And there was a very specific reason for that. I wanted to say it was like contracts were going into effect by then or something like that. Could you give us an assessment of where we stand as a state with addressing some of those concerns that you folks had started running into?
We're still struggling. We still have concerns. There was some funding that was made available by the state to help fill those gaps, which is really helpful. So that's a positive. The downside is and this is maybe the fine print, the contract to try to help fill some of that budget shortfall specified that if the shelter couldn't continue to be operational 2 years post the funding award, so 2 years after the funding award is made, then the entirety of the award would have to be returned. So it's a logistical challenge. So it's nice to be able to see the funds come in, can be supportive, but there's some significant risks for a nonprofit to take by accepting those funds, using those funds, and then not having the feasibility to keep it going 2 or 3 years from now. And I'm not sure exactly where those particular funds would come from. So that's contributing to some current, like, what's our feasibility down the line? How could we continue with this model? So we do have concerns, and we continue to be engaged in conversations with the state leaders about what those concerns are.
And if I were to surmise, without this program in place or programs, there would be enormous systemic gaps in service delivery.
Yeah, because it's such a short term, it's that immediate emergency need. We need somewhere for a young person to go, and there's far too many youth who need a temporary place that won't have their needs met. And I know you alluded to it on the front end, but also at one point in time we were temporarily filling that void of having safe bed available also, which was another alternative in the community, and that's not being provided currently, and that is a need that needs to be filled somewhere by some organization, because without that, youth are not being served properly.
Just to follow up with that too, and I think Erica's is a really good, nice, softball right to you and Fraser on how your expansion of the Stepping Stone Resource Center and your campaign to, create another building that is that emergency shelter for basic needs position. How is that going, and B, what does that serve the population currently, and how does that help expand those that you're able to serve at Fraser?
Yeah, so we are currently in the middle of our capital campaign. We are, like you said, Patrick, we are building a brand new drop-in center for youth in our community. Last year alone, we served over 800 unique individuals at our drop-in center. We, quite frankly, have just outgrown our space that we are in, which is a wonderful thing as we are, expanding and we're meeting the needs of the community. However, it's kind of a little bit of an intimidating thing, right? Because where are we going to put all these people? So we just decided we need to do it right, and we need to create a building that is going to meet the needs. And so really what it's going to be is, like it has been before, but a one-stop shop for youth to come is kind of a springboard of those services. So there is space available for local providers to come in, have those safe, confidential conversations with our clients, network outreach. There is, medical space available for nurses and doctors to come in. We have space available for like community meetings, and how can we all get together and do all these things. And so right now, it's a $6 million project. We still have $2.7 million left to raise. And that's kind of our big push for this year with our transitional living services is trying to get this building done because it's such a need in our community, and it really is a nice, safe place for individuals to go. And we know last year alone, we served, I think, 171 clients during the winter months. This year, I would expect our numbers to be right there, if not more. So the hope is, as we expand into this bigger building, we meet more of the needs of the communities, we can stay open longer. And it really just becomes a place for refuge for these youth, their kiddos, and really just a community space for providers to be able to come and outreach and get together with the clients that they are also serving.
What I like most about that too is there's a holistic approach to it, and saying that this is the one thing that we're going to do. No, it's a one-stop shop. I really like that too. And what I think this is one of those podcasts that on the outset we're like, well, we'll be done in 30 minutes. Don't worry about it. And as we realize, we could probably go on for 5 or 6 more hours. But what I think gives it's kind of like what you said, Erica. It's wonderful that you're expanding, and it's such great. But holy buckets, now we have to expand because there's so much need out there. And I think what more grateful, there isn't, I think, a group that's more grateful than those you're finally serving who have a voice, who have a place to stay, who have this trusted entities like Youthworks and Fraser LTD that are allowing them to open up and be who they are, and they can actually have this particular family that they've been looking for, searching for in a safe space like that. And I think from a mental health standpoint, we kind of addressed it a little bit on how absolutely critical that is. And I think how grateful we are as a community to have 2 organizations like this providing such amazing, sort of solutions to that. With all of our podcasts, as always, we're going to have links in the show notes that go directly to Youthworks and Fraser LTD. So please reach out to Mark and Erica if you've got any additional questions, if you're looking for additional resources, and if you're hiding a big sack of money under your bed, and you want to evenly distribute all this money to both those organizations, I think that would be grateful as well. Mark, Erica, thank you so much for being guests on the MHAN podcast today. I think, again, this is in the series that we're trying to address some of these really critical issues and then really overwhelming and complicated problems. I think we're so grateful that there are entities like you that exist that are providing some of these solutions. And on behalf of Matthew and myself and the rest of the MHAN podcast crew, thank you so much for being a guest today here on the MHAN podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really fun.
This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Health Advocacy Network. MHAN advocates for a consumer, family-driven mental health system of care that provides an array of service choices that are timely, responsive, and effective. Our vision is for every North Dakotan to have access to the right service, whether it be preventative, treatment, or recovery, at the right time, when the service is needed, and at the right place, as near his or her home as possible. To learn more about MHAN, our advocacy efforts, and literature about the North Dakota mental health system, visit our website at www.mhan.org. Again, our website is www.mhan.org.